The morning of June 3, 2018, started like any other for Dr. Alan Brewer, a 68-year-old retired physician who had built a quiet, peaceful life for himself in the shadow of Mount Rainier. Known to friends and neighbors as a kind-hearted man with a passion for the outdoors, Alan often spent his free time hiking, birdwatching, and photographing wildlife. His move to the small town of Ashford, Washington, just a few miles from the national park entrance, had been part of his dream to spend his golden years surrounded by nature. No one imagined that day would be the last time anyone would see him alive, or so they thought. That morning, Alan left a short note on his kitchen table. Gone for a hike, back by dinner. The handwriting was neat, calm, giving no hint that anything unusual lay ahead. His car was later found parked at a popular trailhead along the Wonderland Trail, a scenic but challenging route that circles the mountain. The weather had been fair that day, and rangers said the trail conditions were good. Alan was an experienced hiker, familiar with the terrain, and always careful to carry basic gear. That's what made what happened next so baffling. When Alan didn't return home that evening, his neighbor, who often checked in on him, grew concerned and called local authorities. What followed was one of the largest search operations the area had seen in years. Park rangers, search and rescue teams, volunteers, and even trained dogs scoured miles of trails, ravines, and forest. Helicopters hovered over tree canopies, infrared cameras swept the ground, and flyers with Alan's face were pinned to every board from Ashford to Seattle. But no trace of him was found, not a boot print, not a scrap of clothing, not even a broken branch. It was as if the mountain had simply swallowed him whole. Friends and family were devastated. Alan's daughter, Melissa Brewer, flew in from California and worked tirelessly alongside search crews, refusing to give up hope. In interviews, she described her father as strong, capable, and resilient, a man who had saved countless lives in his career and who, she believed, would find his way back. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, hope began to fade. The official search was called off after nearly a month of intense effort. The mountain, beautiful and vast, had kept its secret. For the next 4 years, Alan's disappearance became a haunting local mystery. Hikers who passed through Mount Rainier National Park would sometimes pause at the trailhead where his car had been found, wondering what had happened. Was it an accident, a fall into some hidden ravine? Did he encounter wildlife? Or was there something else, something darker, that no one wanted to say out loud? People swapped theories in hushed tones over campfires, at diners, and on local forums. But without evidence, all anyone could do was guess. His family held a memorial, but Melissa never stopped searching for answers. She returned to the park several times over the years, walking those same trails, hoping for some sign that might have been missed. Then, in the summer of 2022, something strange happened. A group of wildlife researchers, studying beaver activity near a remote stream deep within the park, made a discovery that would reignite the mystery in ways no one could have predicted. The researchers had been observing a large beaver dam, one that had grown over the years into an impressive structure of sticks, mud, and stones, creating a pond that supported a thriving ecosystem. It was while they were examining the dam's edges that they spotted something unusual wedged among the debris, something that didn't belong in a beaver dam at all. At first, they thought it might be part of a fallen hiker's gear, maybe an old backpack or a torn piece of clothing left behind by accident. But as they cleared away the sticks and mud, the truth began to emerge. It was an object that immediately made their hearts race and their minds race even faster. The researchers quickly contacted the National Park Service, who sealed off the area and called in investigators. News of the discovery spread quickly, and once again Mount Rainier was in the headlines. But what exactly had been found inside that beaver dam? And how was it connected to the retired doctor who had vanished so many years ago? In the days that followed, speculation exploded. Some believed the discovery might finally provide closure, that it would answer the questions that had tormented Alan's family and the community for so long. Others feared it would only deepen the mystery. The park, so serene and majestic on the surface, had always held its share of secrets, stories of lost hikers, strange sightings, and unexplained events. Was Alan Brewer's disappearance just another sad chapter in that history, or was it something entirely different? The discovery drew media crews, curious onlookers, and experts eager to examine the site. But authorities kept details under tight wraps, refusing to confirm what exactly had been pulled from the dam. The only thing they would say was that it was being treated as evidence in an ongoing investigation. For Melissa Brewer, the wait was agonizing. She flew back to Washington as soon as she heard the news, hoping, praying that she might finally learn the truth about what had happened to her father. But as she stood at the edge of the cordoned-off area, looking out at the quiet stream and the dam that had hidden its secret for so long, she felt no closer to answers than she had been 4 years earlier. What was it about Mount Rainier that seemed to draw people in, only to leave some of them lost forever? Was Alan's disappearance a tragic accident, the result of a misstep in the wilderness? Or was there something else at play, something no one had dared consider until now? As investigators worked behind the scenes to piece together what had been found, those questions loomed larger than ever. One thing was certain. The mystery of the retired doctor who vanished from Mount Rainier had taken a new and unexpected turn. The Beaver Dam, built stick by nature's engineers, had held on to its secret for years. But now that secret was out, and what lay ahead for the investigation, and for the family still searching for closure, was anyone's guess. What the wildlife researchers found that day would challenge everything people thought they knew about the case, leaving the community waiting, once again, for answers that seemed just out of reach. And so the story of Dr. Alan Brewer's disappearance entered a new chapter. A chapter that promised revelations, but also more questions. What was hidden in that dam for 4 years? And how did it get there? Stay tuned as we uncover the next part of this chilling mystery. As word spread about the strange find in the Beaver Dam, the small town near Mount Rainier was once again gripped by the mystery of Dr. Alan Brewer's disappearance. Locals who had nearly put the story behind them now found themselves revisiting old memories and sharing their theories all over again. Some said it was only a matter of time before the mountain revealed what it had hidden. Others wondered if the discovery was just another puzzle piece that wouldn't quite fit. The forest, with its tall evergreens and silent, shadowy corners, seemed to hold its breath as everyone waited for answers that refused to come. Melissa Brewer stayed in town, unable to return home to California while the investigation was underway. Each day, she walked the quiet trails near the site where the Beaver Dam had been found, hoping to spot something, anything, that might explain how her father's story had taken this strange turn. She remembered how much Alan had loved this land. He used to talk about how peaceful it was, how the crisp mountain air and the songs of the birds made him feel alive in a way no city ever could. That's why he had moved here after retiring. He wanted to live close to nature, to find peace after a career spent inside hospital walls. But now it seemed that very wilderness had swallowed him without a trace, and the more Melissa thought about it, the more questions filled her mind. Park rangers and investigators worked quietly at the site of the Beaver Dam, careful not to disturb anything that might be important. Rumors spread that what had been found wasn't just a piece of gear or clothing. People whispered about an old hiking boot, faded from time, with laces still tied. Others claimed a torn jacket had been pulled from the dam, one that matched descriptions of the coat Alan had been wearing the day he vanished. But none of these details were confirmed. Officials remained tight-lipped, saying only that the discovery was part of an active investigation. Their silence only fueled speculation. Reporters started arriving, setting up near the entrance to the park. They interviewed townsfolk, hikers, and anyone willing to share their thoughts. Theories ranged from the logical to the wild. Some said Alan must have fallen into the stream, swept away by fast-moving water, and the beavers unknowingly built their dam over his belongings. Others suggested darker ideas, stories of hidden dangers in the woods, of people who vanished and were never meant to be found. The more people talked, the more the line between fact and fiction blurred. Meanwhile, Melissa spent hours at the ranger station, asking for updates. The lead investigator, a quiet man named Sam Hartley, always met her with kind eyes but few words. He understood her need for answers, but the truth was, they didn't have many. The Beaver Dam find was unusual, yes, but it didn't explain what had happened to Alan. There was still no sign of his body, no clue as to how his things ended up in such a place. Sam had been with the Park Service for over 2 decades, and though he'd seen his share of tragedies, this case unsettled him. The mountain, he knew, could be both beautiful and unforgiving. And sometimes it held onto its secrets far longer than people expected. As the days passed, the tension grew. Campers who had planned summer trips to Mount Rainier began to rethink their plans. Some said they felt uneasy hiking the trails, especially near the area where Alan had last been seen. The story had given new life to old legends, the kind that spoke of lost souls wandering the forest or strange figures glimpsed between the trees. It wasn't just the mystery of the retired doctor anymore. It was the feeling that something about the mountain wasn't quite right. Melissa tried to hold onto the memory of her father as she knew him, a man who had spent his life helping others, who loved simple pleasures like a cup of coffee on the porch or a walk at sunrise. She thought back to their last phone call, just days before he disappeared. He had sounded happy, excited about exploring a new trail he'd read about in a guidebook. There had been no hint of worry in his voice, no sign that anything was wrong. That memory made it harder to accept the possibility that he had simply gotten lost or had an accident. Alan had always been so careful. He respected nature and its dangers. If anyone could have avoided trouble on those trails, it was him. But as much as Melissa tried to stay strong, doubts crept in. She wondered if she had missed something, some warning sign in his words or actions that last week. Had he mentioned meeting someone? Had he spoken of anything unusual? She went over every conversation again and again, but nothing stood out. Her father had seemed fine. And yet, here they were, for years later, with a mystery that seemed no closer to being solved. The investigation continued quietly. Search teams were sent back into the woods, combing the area around the dam for any other evidence. Drones flew over parts of the park too rugged for people to search easily, capturing images that analysts studied carefully. But so far, nothing new had turned up. It was as if whatever happened to Alan had left no trace except for what the beavers had accidentally gathered into their home. And still, the mountain stood silent. The streams kept flowing, the trees kept swaying in the wind, and the wildlife carried on, unaware of the human drama unfolding in their midst. Hikers still came, though fewer than before, and many paused at the trailhead where Alan's car had once been found, leaving small tokens, a stone, a flower, a note. It was their way of showing respect, of keeping the memory of a man they had never met alive. Melissa often joined them, sitting quietly on a bench near the trail, listening to the sounds of the forest. She wondered what her father would think of all this. He had always believed in the kindness of strangers, in the strength of community. Maybe, she thought, that was why so many people cared about his story. It reminded them of how fragile life could be, how even the most experienced among us could disappear without a trace. The mystery of Dr. Alan Brewer was far from over. If anything, the discovery at the Beaver Dam had made the questions bigger and the answers harder to find. How had his belongings ended up there? What had really happened on that summer day 4 years ago? And why had the mountain kept its secret for so long? As the sun set behind Mount Rainier, casting long shadows over the forest, the story of the missing doctor continued to haunt everyone who heard it. And with every passing day, the need for answers grew stronger. But the truth, whatever it was, remained hidden, just out of reach, waiting to be uncovered. As the days stretched into weeks following the discovery in the Beaver Dam, the mystery surrounding Dr. Alan Brewer's disappearance seemed to tighten its grip on the small community near Mount Rainier. The tension in the air felt almost heavy at times, as if the mountain itself was watching and waiting. People couldn't stop talking about it, at the grocery store, at gas stations, in the quiet corners of coffee shops. The story wasn't just about a missing doctor anymore. It had become a reflection of deeper fears, of how even a place as breathtaking as Mount Rainier could suddenly seem vast and unforgiving. Melissa Brewer tried to stay patient, but the waiting gnawed at her. Every morning she would check in with the investigators, hoping for news, hoping for some small breakthrough. But the updates were always the same. Search teams had found nothing new, no fresh clues, no sign of what else might be hidden out there. It was as if her father's trail ended at that dam, and beyond that, the forest refused to give up its secrets. At night, she lay awake in her small rented cabin, listening to the sound of the wind through the trees, the distant call of an owl, and the soft rush of water from a nearby stream. She wondered if those were the same sounds her father had heard in his final moments. The thought made her chest ache. The park's lead investigator, Sam Hartley, spent long hours reviewing every piece of information they had. He pulled out the old case files, maps marked with areas that had been searched, reports from hikers who had been in the park around the time Alan went missing. He interviewed rangers who had been on duty that day, hoping that someone might remember some small detail that had been overlooked. But no matter how hard he tried to piece things together, the timeline still had gaps. There were hours that day when no one had seen Alan. He had been alone on the trail, and in that window of time, something had happened that defied explanation. Sam started to focus on the location of the Beaver Dam. It was far off the main trail, in an area that wasn't easy to reach. That raised new questions. How could Alan's belongings have ended up there? If he had gotten lost, wouldn't they have found signs of him closer to the trails? And if he hadn't gotten lost, then what had led him to that remote spot? The more Sam thought about it, the more uneasy he felt. He had worked search and rescue cases before. He knew how people moved through the wilderness when they were disoriented or injured. But nothing about this case fit the patterns he had seen. Meanwhile, another thread of the mystery was quietly unfolding. A local wildlife photographer named Jonah Hayes had been out in the park around the time Alan disappeared. Jonah had been reluctant to come forward at first, unsure whether what he'd seen was important. But with all the attention the case was getting again, he finally decided to speak up. Jonah told Sam that on the day Alan went missing, he had been near a ridge that overlooked the valley where the Beaver Dam was later found. He said he'd seen a figure in the distance, someone moving strangely, as if injured or struggling with something. He hadn't thought much of it at the time, assuming it was a hiker who had wandered off trail. But now, he wondered if that person had been Alan. Jonah's account added a new layer to the investigation. If Alan had been in that valley, it meant he had strayed far from where they had focused their original search. But why? What had drawn him so deep into the wilderness? And if that figure had been Alan, what had happened after Jonah lost sight of him? The terrain in that area was rugged, filled with fallen logs, hidden streams, and steep drops. It was easy to imagine someone getting into trouble there. But still, no one could explain how his belongings ended up tangled in a beaver dam. While Sam worked through these questions, Melissa found herself drawn to a different kind of search. She began speaking with longtime residents, people who knew the mountain's history better than any map or report ever could. Some of them shared stories of other hikers who had vanished over the years, cases that had never been solved, cases that still haunted the community. A retired ranger named Ed Nolan invited Melissa to his home one afternoon. He showed her old newspaper clippings and personal notes he had kept on disappearances in the park. There were more than she had realized, and many of them had eerie similarities. Experienced hikers who had left no trace. Strange weather changes. Equipment found in places that made no sense. It gave Melissa chills. Ed didn't claim to have answers, but he urged Melissa to keep asking questions. He said the mountain was a place of beauty, yes, but also of mystery. People liked to think they could control it, that they understood its dangers. But sometimes, he said, the mountain had its own plans. Melissa left Ed's house that evening with a mix of hope and dread. The thought that her father's disappearance might be part of something larger was both comforting and terrifying. The media attention brought in more than just reporters. A group of amateur sleuths arrived, hoping to uncover clues where professionals had failed. They camped out near the trailheads, flew drones over the valley, and pored over satellite images. Some were respectful of the ongoing investigation, while others seemed more interested in making a name for themselves. Their presence added to the tension, as officials tried to manage the search while keeping the growing crowd from disturbing potential evidence. Melissa did her best to block out the noise and focus on what mattered, finding the truth. She walked the trails daily, sometimes alone, sometimes with volunteers who offered to help. She talked with other hikers, asking if they had seen anything unusual. Everyone had a theory, but no one had answers. The mountain remained silent, offering no clues, no explanations, just the endless sound of wind through the pines and water over stone. Back at the ranger station, Sam received a report that complicated things further. One of the search teams had come across another odd find, not far from the Beaver Dam, hidden beneath a thick layer of moss and brush. It was a weathered map, torn at the edges and faded from the elements. The map was of Mount Rainier National Park, marked with what appeared to be a hand-drawn route that didn't match any official trail. The ink had run in places, but one thing was clear: the route ended near the valley where Alan's belongings had been found. Sam stared at the map for a long time, trying to make sense of it. Could Alan have drawn this? Was it part of some plan he had kept to himself? Or was it left behind by someone else entirely? The discovery raised more questions than it answered. Sam decided to bring the map to Melissa, hoping it might spark a memory, but she shook her head when she saw it. She'd never seen the map before, and as far as she knew, her father hadn't been exploring off-trail routes. The map only deepened the sense of unease that had settled over the case. The days continued to pass, each one marked by more uncertainty. The Beaver Dam, once just a quiet part of the forest, had become the center of a growing web of questions. How had it hidden its secret for so long? What else might it still be hiding? And most importantly, what really happened to Dr. Alan Brewer on that summer day 4 years ago? The conflict between the need for answers and the silence of the mountain had never felt sharper. And with every new discovery, the truth seemed to slip a little further out of reach, leaving the community and Alan's family waiting in the shadows of Mount Rainier for a resolution that refused to come. As the investigation stretched deeper into the summer, the weight of the unanswered questions began to take a toll on everyone involved. The discovery of the torn, weathered map near the Beaver Dam had only fueled more theories, but no one could piece the puzzle together. The map's strange hand-drawn route ending so close to where Alan Brewer's belongings were found made it feel like a clue that should unlock the mystery, but instead, it left Sam Hartley and his team more confused. They scoured park records to see if any known hikers had ever reported missing maps or talked about secret paths in that part of Mount Rainier. Nothing matched. It was as if the map had appeared from nowhere, much like Alan's belongings. Melissa Brewer clung to the hope that they were getting closer to the truth. Each day, she returned to that stretch of forest near the valley, walking carefully along game trails and faint paths that wove through the thick trees. She kept the map folded in her pocket, pulling it out at times to study the fading lines, as if by sheer will she could make it give up its secrets. The forest felt different now. What once seemed peaceful now felt heavy, like it was watching her, listening to her footsteps. The sound of snapping twigs or the rustle of an animal in the brush made her heart race. Every shadow felt longer, every breeze colder. The amateur sleuths who had come to help weren't leaving either. Some had set up camp at the edge of the park, their tents visible from the road leading into town. They shared theories online, trying to solve the case from the comfort of camp chairs and laptop screens. Some insisted Alan had stumbled upon something he shouldn't have seen, maybe an illegal operation deep in the forest. Others believed the mountain itself, with its deep caves and hidden ravines, had taken him, as it had others before. The stories spread like wildfire on social media, drawing even more attention to the park. Tourists came hoping to walk the trails of the missing doctor, to see the Beaver Dam that had hidden his belongings, to feel the chill of a real-life mystery beneath their feet. Sam tried to keep the focus on the facts. His team combed the area near the dam again, this time expanding their search grid farther than before. They brought in fresh dogs, specialists trained to detect the faintest trace of human scent, even years old. The handlers moved silently through the forest, hopeful but realistic. The mountain was vast. Time and nature had worked hard to erase what little trail Alan might have left. And yet, every so often, one of the dogs would pause, sniff the air, and lead their handler deeper into the woods. Each time, the searchers would freeze, hoping this was the break they needed. But time after time, they came up empty. Melissa found herself growing closer to Sam during those long days. His steady presence, his quiet determination, gave her something to lean on. They often spoke late into the night, sharing stories not just of the search but of their lives. Sam told her about his own losses, about the cases that haunted him. Melissa shared memories of her father, small things that only she would remember, a laugh, a favorite song, the way he would pause to listen to the wind in the trees. These talks gave her strength, but they also deepened the ache in her heart. Because the more she remembered her father as he had been, the harder it was to accept that she might never truly know what happened to him. As July drew to a close, the weather shifted. The mountain was known for sudden changes, and now dark clouds gathered more often over its peaks. Thunderstorms rolled through in the afternoons, leaving the trails slick and dangerous. Search teams had to move with extra caution, knowing that one wrong step on the muddy slopes could lead to disaster. But the worsening conditions didn't slow the search. If anything, it added urgency. Everyone felt that they were on the edge of something, like the truth was just within reach, hidden behind one more bend in the trail, one more thick stand of trees. One morning, as the sun rose behind a veil of mist, Sam's radio crackled to life. A search team deeper into the valley reported finding something unusual. Sam and Melissa rushed to the site, their boots splashing through shallow streams, hearts pounding with a mix of fear and hope. When they arrived, the searchers pointed silently to a cluster of rocks near the water's edge. There, half buried in mud and moss, was a small metal tin, battered and rusted from exposure. Sam knelt and carefully picked it up, turning it over in his hands. The lid was sealed tight, but inside, something rattled softly. Could it belong to Alan? Was it another piece of the puzzle? They took the tin back to the ranger station, where Sam gently pried it open. Inside were a few water-damaged scraps of paper, too ruined to read clearly at first glance. But as they dried the pieces and studied them under a lamp, faint writing began to emerge, notes, perhaps, or parts of a journal. The words were broken and faded, but enough remained to send a chill through the room. Phrases like off trail, strange sound, and don't feel alone could be made out among the smudges. It wasn't clear if Alan had written them, but the notes hinted at someone in distress, someone who felt watched in the deep forest. News of the find spread quickly, stirring up more speculation. Some believed the notes confirmed their fears that Alan had stumbled onto something sinister. Others thought they pointed to disorientation, perhaps brought on by injury or illness. But one thing was certain, the tension that had been building for weeks now felt near its breaking point. Everyone sensed that they were closing in on something, though what it was remained as shadowed as the forest itself. Melissa clutched the tin as if it were a lifeline, reading and rereading the scraps of writing, searching for some connection to her father. Could these notes really be his last words? Or were they left by another lost soul, caught in the same web of mystery? The questions gnawed at her, keeping sleep at bay and filling her dreams with visions of the mountains, dark woods, and hidden valleys. The park rangers and volunteers pressed on with their search, despite the storms that now rolled through more often, bringing lightning and heavy rains. The mountain seemed to resist giving up its secrets, but Sam and his team refused to back down. They widened their search even farther, exploring caves, climbing ridges, and probing the dense undergrowth near the stream. Every new lead brought hope, but also fresh heartbreak as they returned, time after time, with no clear answers. And all the while, the Beaver Dam that had started it all stood silent and undisturbed, the pond behind it reflecting the dark sky like a mirror. It had held its secret for 4 years. What else might it be hiding? The thought haunted Melissa, Sam, and everyone who had become part of this strange and sorrowful story. As August approached, the tension in the air grew almost unbearable. The mystery of Dr. Alan Brewer felt closer to a resolution than ever before, but the final piece remained hidden. The mountain loomed over everything, its slope shrouded in mist, its trail slick with rain, its heart as silent as ever. And in that silence, the searchers moved carefully, knowing that the answers they sought could be just one step, one discovery away, or as distant as the first day Alan vanished into the trees. The rain came harder as August deepened, turning the trails around Mount Rainier into streams of mud and loose stone. The mountain felt more isolated than ever, wrapped in thick mist and the constant patter of rain on leaves. Melissa Brewer had grown used to the dampness, to the way her boots squelched in the mud and her jacket clung heavy on her shoulders. But inside, she felt anything but numb. The discovery of the tin and the fragments of writing inside had shaken her deeply, but it also gave her something she hadn't felt in a long time, a hope, mixed with dread. She could feel the story of her father's disappearance nearing some terrible truth, but what that truth was remained hidden, just like the mountain's peaks behind the storm clouds. Sam Hartley hadn't slept much. The notes in the tin kept him awake at night, reading and rereading them, trying to squeeze meaning from the blurred, water-damaged words. He sent photos of the fragments to handwriting experts and forensic analysts, hoping someone could confirm if the writing belonged to Alan. But no one could say for sure. The words could have been Alan's, or they could have been left by someone else lost in the same unforgiving landscape. Sam felt the pressure building. The community expected answers. Melissa deserved them. But the mountain still held tight to its secrets. And then, something happened that no one could have expected. One afternoon, as the storm clouds broke for a few hours and pale sunlight streamed through, a pair of hikers stumbled into the ranger station. They were soaked and breathless, faces pale, eyes wide with something between fear and disbelief. Sam hurried over, and before they even spoke, he knew they had seen something. The older of the two men spoke first, voice trembling. They had been following an old logging road on the far side of the valley, hoping to spot wildlife, when they saw what they thought was a man standing still near a grove of firs. At first, they thought it was another hiker, but as they got closer, the figure didn't move. It didn't even seem to notice them. And when they called out, it simply turned and slipped into the trees, silent as a shadow. The hikers swore the man matched Alan Brewer's description. Same build, same grayish jacket like the one in the missing person posters that still hung at trailheads. Sam felt his heart pound as he listened. After all these years, could Alan still be out there? Was it possible? Or had the hikers seen something else, their minds playing tricks in the mist and the woods? He didn't want to believe in ghosts or strange forest legends, but the tension in the air made it hard to ignore how unusual this case had become. Melissa was called to the station as soon as the hikers finished their account. When she arrived, Sam hesitated before telling her. He didn't want to give her false hope, but she insisted on hearing every word. As the hikers described the figure again, she felt a strange mix of emotions. Could her father truly be alive out there, hiding in the forest all this time? Or had the mountain claimed him in some way no one could understand? Whatever the truth, she knew she couldn't leave without finding out. The sighting shifted everything. The search teams reorganized, now focusing on the area near the logging road where the hikers had seen the figure. The stakes felt higher than ever, and with each passing hour, the sense of urgency deepened. Sam assembled his best team, and Melissa insisted on going with them. The group moved out at first light, the ground still slick from the night's rain. They pushed through the undergrowth, calling Alan's name, listening for any sound that might guide them. But the forest was silent, save for the drip of water from the trees and the occasional call of a distant bird. The deeper they went, the more the forest seemed to close in, the trees standing like sentries, the mist curling low along the ground. Hours passed with no sign of the figure the hikers had seen. But just as the group was about to turn back, one of the searchers shouted from farther up the slope. Sam and Melissa ran toward the voice, slipping and sliding on the muddy trail. There, half hidden by a fallen log, lay another clue. It was a backpack, old and weather-worn, its fabric fraying at the edges. The searcher carefully lifted it, and as they opened it, the contents told a chilling story. Inside were a rusted compass, a smashed pair of glasses, and a small notebook, its pages warped with moisture but still intact enough to reveal words written in a familiar hand. Melissa's breath caught as she recognized her father's writing. The notebook entries were short, hurried, as if written in moments of fear or confusion. The first few pages described the trail, the weather, observations about wildlife, typical of Alan, who loved to document his hikes. But then the tone changed. There were entries about hearing footsteps behind him, about feeling watched, about trying to find his way back and realizing he had somehow gotten turned around. The last entry was the most unsettling. It simply read, "I see them again. I don't know who they are. I have to keep moving." The search team stood in stunned silence as Melissa read the words aloud. Who was Alan referring to? Had he encountered someone in the forest that day? Someone who didn't want him found? Or was it the desperation of a man lost, his mind playing tricks as exhaustion and fear set in? Sam felt the tension rise to a breaking point. They were closer than ever to understanding what had happened, but the pieces still didn't fit neatly. If Alan had written those words, why had no one found him sooner? And who, or what, had he seen out there? As the team regrouped and began to plan the next phase of their search, the weather shifted again. The sky darkened, the wind picked up, and rain began to fall once more. It felt as if the mountain itself was warning them to leave, to stop prying into its secrets. But no one was willing to give up now. The searchers pressed on, moving deeper into the woods, their voices echoing through the trees as they called for Alan. The forest felt different now, charged with tension, as if the ground beneath their feet held stories it was reluctant to share. Every snapped twig, Every sudden gust of wind made hearts race. The deeper they went, the clearer it became that something wasn't right. The mountain had hidden Alan Brewer for 4 years, and it seemed determined to keep him hidden. But the clues they had found, the tin, the map, the notebook, were pulling them closer to the heart of the mystery. And whatever waited for them at that heart, it felt close. Very close. As night began to fall, and the team made camp, Melissa stared into the flickering firelight, clutching the notebook to her chest. The last entry echoed in her mind, chilling her more than the cold rain ever could. I see them again. I have to keep moving. What had her father seen that day? Who had been out there with him? And were they still out there now? The mountain's shadow loomed over the camp, and as darkness swallowed the forest, the searchers knew they were closer than ever to the truth, but also closer to whatever danger had been waiting all along. The night was long and restless at the makeshift camp deep in the forest. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a strange stillness that made even the crackle of the campfire seem loud. Melissa lay awake, clutching her father's notebook, unable to shake the feeling that they were on the edge of discovering the truth, but also on the edge of something she wasn't sure she was ready to face. The last words Alan had written haunted her thoughts. I see them again. I have to keep moving. Who had he seen? What had driven him deeper into the wilderness, away from safety? At first light, Sam gathered the team. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and a cold fog clung to the ground, making it hard to see more than a few yards ahead. But no one hesitated. They moved quietly through the undergrowth, hearts pounding, listening for any sound that might guide them. The clues they'd found had pointed them in one direction, deeper into the valley, toward an area few hikers ever reached. The forest here was older, wilder. Massive trees stood like giants, and the underbrush was thick, as if nature itself was trying to keep people out. After hours of searching, one of the team members let out a shout. Sam and Melissa pushed through the brush to find him standing at the edge of a small clearing. There, hidden beneath a thick tangle of vines and fallen branches, was what looked like an old shelter. It wasn't much, just a crude structure of sticks and logs, likely built in desperation. Sam's heart raced. Could this have been Alan's attempt to survive out here? As they cleared the branches, they found more signs, remnants of a small fire pit, an old water bottle, and what looked like scraps of clothing, faded and torn by time and weather. Melissa stepped inside the shelter, the air damp and cold. She imagined her father here, alone, scared, writing those last notes in his journal. It was almost too much to bear. But then something else caught Sam's eye. A narrow path, barely visible, leading away from the shelter and deeper into the trees. Without a word, the group followed it, their steps quickening, driven by the sense that they were closing in on the truth. The path led them to a rocky outcrop overlooking a deep ravine. And there, caught between two boulders at the edge of the ravine, they found what they had been searching for all these years. A tattered gray jacket, the same one Alan had been wearing the day he vanished. And beneath it, partially hidden by leaves and debris, were the remains of a man. Time and nature had taken their toll, but there was no doubt. They had found Dr. Alan Brewer. Melissa fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face as she whispered her father's name. Sam placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, his own heart heavy with the weight of the discovery. The search was over. The mystery that had haunted them all for so long had finally come to an end. But even as they processed the moment, questions still lingered. How had Alan ended up here? What had he been running from in those final days? As the team worked to respectfully recover Alan's remains, Sam noticed something strange. Near the rocks where Alan had fallen, there were markings on the stone, faint, as if scratched in haste. They looked like symbols or letters, but the meaning was unclear. Sam took photos, hoping they might provide some final clue. And then, just as they were preparing to leave, one of the searchers spotted something wedged in the roots of a fallen tree nearby. It was an old camera, its casing cracked, the strap tangled in the roots. They brought the camera back to the ranger station that evening. The team worked carefully to recover whatever they could from the memory card inside. When the images finally loaded onto the computer, the room fell silent. There were photos of the forest, of wildlife, of the trails, typical of Alan's hikes. But then came the final images. Blurry, dark, taken at odd angles as if snapped in haste. Shapes in the trees. Figures, maybe. Shadowy forms that seemed to stand just at the edge of the clearing where Alan's shelter had been. The last photo was the most chilling, a close-up of what looked like a face, half hidden in the foliage, watching. Melissa stared at the screen, heart pounding. The face didn't look familiar. It wasn't anyone from town, and it wasn't Alan. Sam frowned, leaning closer. The face was pale, the features unclear, but the eyes were fixed on the camera, on Alan. Someone had been out there with him. Someone had been close, watching. The discovery of the photos turned everything on its head. Had Alan been followed? Had he tried to capture proof of whoever, or whatever, had been shadowing him in the woods? Theories that had once seemed far-fetched now didn't feel so impossible. The idea that Alan had gotten lost seemed less likely. It looked more like he had been trying to escape something, or someone. The markings on the rocks, the frantic journal entries, the camera images, they all painted a picture of a man who had been afraid, who had been driven deeper into the wilderness by more than just confusion or injury. The community was shaken when the news broke. People who had followed the case for years now looked at the forest differently, wondering what else it might be hiding. And just when it seemed the mystery had reached its end, the final twist came. A week after Alan's remains were recovered, during a routine patrol, rangers found fresh tracks near the site of the old shelter. Human tracks, barefoot, recent, and they weren't Melissa's, Sam's, or any member of the search team. Someone had been there, after all these years, walking the same ground. The discovery left everyone stunned. Had someone been living out there in secret? Was it possible that Alan hadn't been alone during those final days? And if so, who was it that had shared the forest with him? The truth of those final moments on Mount Rainier seemed as close as the mist that rolled down from its peaks. But just like the mist, it slipped away the harder they tried to grasp it. The mountain had given up one secret, but it had kept another. And as the search ended, the forest remained, vast and silent, holding tight to the answers only it knew. The discovery of Alan Brewer's remains brought both sorrow and relief to Melissa and the team who had searched for so long. At last, the mystery that had haunted them for years had a face, one marked by tragedy, but at least now known. The camera's chilling images, the strange markings on the rocks, and the fresh tracks near the old shelter kept the questions alive for a while. But with Alan laid to rest, the community began to heal. Melissa chose to stay a little longer in the small mountain town. She found comfort in walking the same trails her father had loved, seeing the forest through his eyes one last time. The mountain, once a source of mystery and fear, started to feel peaceful again, though the memories would never fade. Sam and his team continued to study the evidence they had gathered, but no clear explanation ever came for the figure caught in Alan's last photos. Some believed it was another lost hiker, living off the land and avoiding discovery. Others thought it might have been a trick of light and shadow, the forest playing on Alan's fear during his final, desperate days. The tracks that appeared after the recovery of Alan's remains were searched for, but no trace of whoever made them was ever found. Eventually, the patrols lessened, and the mountain was left in quiet once more. Melissa held a small memorial for Alan at the edge of the forest, joined by the searchers, rangers, and townsfolk who had kept his memory alive all these years. She spoke softly about the man her father was, the kindness he showed to everyone, his love for the wild places, and his unshakable belief in the goodness of people. As she looked out over the trees, she felt that, in some way, he was still there, part of the mountain he had admired so much. The forest that had once seemed so vast and cruel now felt like a place where his spirit could rest. In the weeks that followed, hikers returned to the trails of Mount Rainier. The many paused at the spots marked by Alan's story. Some left small offerings, a stone, a note, a flower, simple signs of respect. His story had touched people far beyond the town. News of the long search, the strange clues, and the quiet strength of those who refused to give up inspired many. It reminded them that even in the face of nature's power, human connection and perseverance could shine through. Sam and Melissa stayed in touch, bound by the experience they had shared. Sam found peace in knowing they had done all they could. The mountain's mysteries might never be fully solved, but they had given Alan's family and community the closure they deserved. Melissa, after spending more time in the town her father had called home, finally returned to California, carrying his notebook, the recovered camera, and the memories of the people who had stood by her through the darkest days. As time passed, the story of Dr. Alan Brewer became part of the mountain's lore. Hikers spoke of him with respect, and his name was remembered alongside the legends of Mount Rainier. The strange figure caught in his camera, the markings on the rocks, and the fresh footprints remained part of the mystery, but they no longer haunted those who had searched for answers. Instead, they became reminders that nature still holds secrets, and that not every question has a clear or simple answer. Melissa often thought back to the final days of the search, the fear, the hope, the heartbreak. But she also remembered the strength she had found, the kindness of strangers, and the beauty of a community coming together in the face of uncertainty. The mountain had tested them, but it had also shown them what mattered most. She knew her father would have wanted her to remember that. In the end, the story of Alan Brewer was not just about a man lost to the wilderness. It was about the love between a father and daughter, the dedication of those who never gave up, and the mysteries that still live in the heart of the wild. The mountain stood silent once more, its trails busy with new footsteps, its forests alive with birdsong and whine through the trees. And as the seasons turned, the story faded gently into the background, becoming part of the mountain's endless, quiet song.